It was just another ordinary day at the bustling corporate office. The employees were busy typing away on their computers, engaged in meetings, and hurrying through the hallways. Among them was Maria, a janitor who had been working there for years. She moved quietly, almost invisible to those around her, as she swept the floors and emptied trash bins. Maria took pride in her work, even if it meant cleaning up after others who barely noticed her presence. But little did she know that today was going to be different. Today, everything would change. As she made her way through the executive floor, Maria heard laughter echoing from the CEO's office. Richard Thompson, the powerful and wealthy CEO, was known for his strict leadership and no-nonsense attitude. He demanded respect and obedience, and his employees feared crossing him. But beyond his polished suit and confident smile, Richard had a reputation for being arrogant and looking down on those he considered beneath him. Just as Maria was about to leave, Richard's voice boomed across the room. "Hey you, janitor," he shouted, waving her over with a dismissive hand. Startled, Maria hurried toward him, her heart pounding. She kept her head down, trying to avoid eye contact, as she wondered what she had done wrong. But when she looked up, she was met with a sight she would never forget. Richard was leaning back in his luxurious leather chair, his polished shoes propped up on his desk, dirty from his morning walk. With a smug smile, he tossed a shoe brush at her feet and said, "Clean them." Now, the room fell silent as the other employees watched, their faces a mix of shock and discomfort. Maria's face flushed with humiliation, but she didn't dare protest. She bent down, her hands trembling as she picked up the brush. Her eyes stung, but she held back her tears, determined not to let him see her pain. As she began to polish his shoes, Richard's laughter echoed in her ears, and she could feel the weight of his arrogance pressing down on her. But what no one knew was that this moment of humiliation would set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. What happened next would leave everyone speechless, even Richard himself. As Maria continued to polish Richard's shoes, her hands moved mechanically, but her mind was racing. She remembered the countless days she had worked tirelessly, often staying late to ensure every corner of the building was spotless. She thought about her children waiting for her at home, relying on her to provide for them. She swallowed her pride, knowing she couldn't afford to lose this job. But the humiliation was unbearable, and each mocking laugh from Richard cut deeper than the last. The other employees looked on, uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up. They exchanged uneasy glances, pretending to be busy with their work, afraid of becoming Richard's next target. No one dared to question the powerful CEO. He held their livelihoods in his hands, and they knew it. To them, Maria was just a janitor, someone they saw every day but never really noticed. She was part of the background, a silent presence who never complained or caused trouble. As she finished polishing the first shoe, Richard leaned forward, inspecting her work with exaggerated scrutiny. "Missed a spot," he said coldly, pointing to a tiny smudge. His condescending tone made her stomach turn, but she forced herself to keep going. She focused on the task, hoping it would end soon. But Richard wasn't done humiliating her. He leaned back, crossing his arms with a satisfied smirk. "Make sure they're spotless. I have an important meeting, and I can't look bad because of your incompetence." Maria felt her face burn with shame, but she bit her tongue and continued polishing. She could feel her knees aching from kneeling, but she refused to show any weakness. She wouldn't give him this satisfaction. Inside, her emotions were a storm of anger, sadness, and helplessness. But she knew she had no choice but to endure it. Meanwhile, Richard basked in his power, enjoying the way everyone obeyed him without question. To him, Maria was nothing more than a servant, someone whose only purpose was to clean up after him. He didn't care about her struggles or her dignity. In his eyes, status and wealth defined a person's worth, and Maria didn't measure up. But what Richard didn't realize was that his actions were being watched. From a distance, someone was recording the entire scene on their phone, capturing every cruel word and demeaning gesture. And as the camera continued to roll, the stage was set for a shocking twist that no one could have anticipated. As Maria continued to polish Richard's shoes, her heart felt heavier with each stroke. She wanted to scream, to stand up for herself, but fear kept her silent. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not with bills piling up and her children depending on her. She thought about her youngest son, who needed new school supplies, and her daughter, who dreamed of going to college. Those dreams rested on her shoulders, and she wasn't about to let Richard's cruelty take that away from her. But Maria wasn't the only one affected by this moment. In the back of the room, Alex, a junior employee, watched the scene unfold. His fists clenched as he fought the urge to speak up. Alex had always admired Maria's dedication. She was kind to everyone, always greeting people with a warm smile. Watching her being humiliated by the very man they all feared made his blood boil. But he hesitated. Standing up to Richard could cost him his career. After all, Richard was known for firing anyone who challenged his authority. Yet Alex couldn't shake the feeling of injustice. His conscience screamed at him to do something, but his fear kept him rooted to his chair. He looked around the room, hoping someone else would intervene. But his colleagues were all avoiding eye contact, pretending not to see what was happening right in front of them. The silence was deafening, a painful reminder of how easily people looked away when they were afraid. Meanwhile, the person recording the video felt their hands tremble. They couldn't believe what they were witnessing. How could someone as powerful as Richard treat another human being with such disrespect? They knew this video could expose Richard's true nature, but they also knew the risks. If they were caught, they could lose their job. But some truths were too important to stay hidden. As Maria finished polishing the second shoe, Richard stood up and looked down at her with a satisfied smirk. "Next time, do your job right the first time," he sneered before walking away without another word. Maria felt a wave of relief as he left, but the shame lingered. She slowly stood up, her knees aching, and gathered her cleaning supplies. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, avoiding the pitying looks from the others. She just wanted to disappear. But little did she know, the video of her humiliation was about to go viral, and her life was about to change in ways she never imagined. What started as a moment of shame was about to become a catalyst for something far more powerful, something that would shake the company to its core and reveal the hidden strength Maria never knew she had. The video spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was shared across social media platforms, gaining thousands of views every minute. People were outraged, their comments filled with anger and disbelief. How could a CEO treat someone like that? She deserves respect, not humiliation. The public backlash was fierce, and the company's image began to crumble. Yet inside the office, Richard was blissfully unaware. He continued his day as usual, barking orders and expecting nothing less than complete obedience. It wasn't until later that afternoon, during a board meeting, that his phone buzzed nonstop. Annoyed, he glanced at the screen, his eyes widening as he saw the countless notifications. News headlines were already circulating. CEO caught on camera humiliating employee. Outrage after janitor forced to clean executive's shoes. His face turned pale as he realized his actions had been exposed to the world. His authority was now under fire, and his reputation was at stake. Meanwhile, Maria walked through the hallways with her head down, trying to ignore the whispers around her. She had no idea that the video was out there or that her story had touched the hearts of thousands. To her, it was just another painful day she wanted to forget. She focused on her work, scrubbing floors and emptying trash bins, unaware that her life was about to change. Alex, however, knew exactly what was happening. He had seen the video and felt a mixture of relief and fear. Relief that Richard's true nature was exposed, but fear of the consequences. What would happen to Maria? Would she be blamed for the controversy? And what about the person who recorded it? Would they be safe? Questions swirled in his mind, and his guilt grew stronger. He had stood by and done nothing. The office was buzzing with gossip, and tension hung heavy in the air. Employees huddled in corners, whispering about the video. Some were worried about the company's future, while others secretly felt justice was finally being served. But no one dared to speak openly, not yet. They were all waiting to see what Richard would do next. Back in his office, Richard's anger boiled over. He slammed his fist on the desk, his face red with rage. How could someone betray him like this? He paced back and forth, thinking about damage control. He knew his power was slipping, and his arrogance was replaced by fear. If he didn't act fast, everything he built could come crashing down. Unaware of Richard's fury, Maria continued her duties, wiping down tables in the break room. She noticed the uneasy glances from her coworkers, but didn't think much of it. She was used to being invisible. But this time was different. This time, the whole world was watching, and her quiet strength was about to inspire a movement she never expected. As Maria finished wiping down the tables, she heard hurried footsteps approaching. It was Hannah, one of the few coworkers who had always been kind to her. Hannah's face was pale, her eyes wide with worry. She pulled Maria aside and whispered, "Have you seen the video?" Maria looked at her in confusion. "What video?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hannah's expression softened. "You need to see this." She pulled out her phone and played the video, the one that had now gone viral. Maria watched in stunned silence as the scene unfolded. Richard's cold commands, his arrogant smirk, her own trembling hands polishing his shoes. She felt a rush of emotions, shame, anger, humiliation, all flooding back as if it were happening all over again. Her knees felt weak, and she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. Who recorded this?" She stammered, her voice shaking. But Hannah shook her head. "No one knows. It just appeared online, and now it's everywhere." Before Maria could process it all, Richard's booming voice echoed down the hallway. "Everyone. Conference room." Now, his tone was cold, filled with fury. Employees rushed to the conference room, their faces tense with fear. Maria followed, her heart racing, unsure of what was about to happen. As she entered the room, she saw Richard standing at the head of the table, his face red with anger. His eyes were blazing as he scanned the crowd, searching for the person responsible. "Who did it?" he demanded, his voice sharp and unforgiving. "Who recorded that video?" The room was silent, no one daring to speak. Richard slammed his fist on the table, making everyone jump. "Do you realize the damage this has caused? Our clients are calling, the board is furious, and my reputation is on the line." He glared at his employees, his gaze icy and unyielding. "Whoever did this will pay." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. She could feel his anger radiating through the room, but more than that, she felt a growing sense of fear. What if Richard blamed her? Would she lose her job? Would he try to silence her? The thought made her stomach churn, but she kept her head down, praying he wouldn't notice her. But then something unexpected happened. Alex cleared his throat and took a step forward. His face was pale, his hands trembling, but his eyes were filled with determination. "Sir," he began, his voice wavering, "I didn't record the video. but I think it's time we talked about how people are treated here." Guests echoed around the room, and all eyes turned to Alex. Maria's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't believe it. Someone was finally standing up to Richard. Richard's face contorted with anger, his fists clenching. "Excuse me." He spat, his voice dripping with contempt. But Alex didn't back down. People deserve respect, no matter their position. What you did was wrong. His voice grew stronger, his courage building with each word. The room was deathly quiet, everyone holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Richard's face turned a shade of red Maria had never seen before. His authority was being challenged, and he was losing control. But just as he opened his mouth to retaliate, another voice spoke up. "Alex is right." It was Hannah, her face firm with resolve. "Maria deserves better. We all do." And then another voice joined in, and another. One by one, employees began to speak, their fear replaced by courage. Maria's eyes filled with tears as she watched in awe. She had felt so alone, so powerless. But now her pain was transforming into something else, hope. Richard looked around, his confidence crumbling as the people he once controlled stood united against him. The tide was turning, but the battle was far from over. The question now was, how far would Richard go to protect his power? And who would pay the price? Richard's face twisted with rage as his employees stood united against him. He wasn't used to defiance, especially from people he considered beneath him. His voice shook with anger as he barked, "Enough. You think you can turn against me? I built this company. I made you who you are." But his words didn't have the power they once did. The fear that kept everyone silent for so long was gone, replaced by a collective courage that even Richard couldn't break. He turned his glare toward Alex, his eyes narrowing. "You're fired," he spat, his voice cold and final. Gasps filled the room, but Alex stood his ground, his chin held high. "That's fine," Alex replied, his voice steady. "But at least I can walk out with my dignity." His words hung in the air, a powerful echo that shattered Richard's illusion of control. Before Richard could respond, the door to the conference room swung open. To everyone's surprise, it was the chairman of the board, accompanied by two other board members. Their faces were grave, their eyes locked on Richard. "We need to talk," the chairman said, his voice firm. The tension in the room was palpable. Richard's confidence wavered for the first time as he stammered, I can explain." The chairman held up his hand, silencing him. "Save it. We've seen the video. It's all over the news. Do you realize what you've done to this company's reputation?" Richard's face went pale, his bravado crumbling. I didn't know someone was recording," he muttered, his voice weak. The chairman's expression hardened. "That's your defense. Not that you did something wrong, but that you got caught." The room was silent, everyone watching as Richard's empire fell apart before their eyes. The chairman turned to Maria, his gaze softening. "I'm truly sorry for what you went through. No one deserves that." Maria's eyes filled with tears. She had never expected to be acknowledged, let alone defended. It was a moment she would never forget. Turning back to Richard, the chairman's face grew stern. "Effective immediately, you're removed as CEO. We can't have someone leading this company who lacks basic human decency." Richard's jaw dropped, his face flushing with humiliation. He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. Defeated, he slumped his shoulders, realizing his reign was over. As security escorted Richard out, a hush fell over the room. No one moved until he was gone, his figure disappearing down the hallway that once belonged to him. It was over. The tyrant who ruled through fear had finally been defeated. A wave of relief washed over the employees as they looked at each other, smiles breaking out. But just as the tension began to ease, Maria's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and froze. It was a message from an unknown number. "I know who recorded the video." Her heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? And why were they reaching out now? Before she could process it, another message appeared. "Be careful who you trust. This isn't over." A chill ran down Maria's spine as she looked around the room. Everyone was celebrating Richard's downfall, unaware of the new mystery that had just surfaced. Maria realized that while one battle had ended, another was just beginning. And this time, the stakes were even higher. Maria's heart raced as she stared at the mysterious messages on her phone. Who could possibly know about the video's source? And why would they warn her? She looked around the room at her coworkers, their faces bright with relief and hope. For the first time, they were free from Richard's reign of fear. But Maria couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was still lurking beneath the surface. She decided to confide in Alex. After everything he had done to stand up for her, she trusted him. They stepped out into the hallway, away from curious ears. She showed him the messages, her hands trembling. Alex's face grew serious as he read them, his eyes narrowing with concern. "This isn't over," he murmured, echoing the words of the anonymous texter. Someone's still trying to control the narrative. Together, they decided to investigate. They retraced the events of that day, trying to figure out who was present and who could have recorded the video. They spoke to Hannah, who remembered seeing someone linger near the doorway just before Richard humiliated Maria. But when they checked the security cameras, the footage was mysteriously missing. It was as if someone had covered their tracks, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Days turned into weeks, and the company began to rebuild itself under new leadership. Morale improved, and employees no longer feared coming to work. Maria was promoted, not out of pity, but because of her hard work and dedication. It was the recognition she had earned long before that fateful day. Yet the mystery of the video lingered in her mind. Who had been her silent ally? And why were they hiding? Then one evening, Maria received another text from the same unknown number. "Sometimes change needs a push. Consider this my way of helping." She read the words over and over, her heart pounding. Whoever it was didn't want credit or recognition. They simply wanted justice. And in a strange way, Maria felt grateful. Someone had seen her pain and acted when no one else would. As she stood by her office window, looking out at the city lights, Maria took a deep breath. She realized that the power Richard once held over her was gone. She was no longer afraid, no longer the silent janitor invisible to those around her. She had a voice, and she was ready to use it. Turning off her phone, Maria decided to let the mystery rest. Whoever had helped her clearly didn't want to be found, and maybe that was okay. What mattered was that justice had been served, and she had reclaimed her dignity. Smiling to herself, Maria walked out of the office, her head held high, ready to embrace the future that was finally hers. The story of the CEO who humiliated a janitor would be remembered, not for his cruelty, but for the courage it inspired in those who dared to stand up. And in the end, that was the real victory.